Allah can judge me. So we know that's true. Only Allah can judge us. So we're going to get right on into it.
I came in with a beautiful subject for you, but that first part was so heavy I had to get it off because
turn it up a little bit, brother.
To see how we rejected Organized Muhammad and still do. And every day more and more truth is coming out to show how right on the man was. And all I'm suggesting to us is it's okay if you're alive, just come back to that man.
Y'all feeling alright today?
I mean, your life is for the better. That's all I'm saying there. But with this balance thing, which is very, very important.
Perhaps I was blind to the fact my people's being tricked by our way of playing act. Steady being attacked by the wicked race. That was Yakub's creation, pale face Caucasian. Feel the flame blazing, and they say it's the black man that I should fear, but it's the white man doing all the killing here. Allah back me, kill them if they try to bust. Protected by the wheel, built with the best of steel. Fulfill the prophecy and put the pigs in the dirt. The sun is 93 million miles from the earth, and the earth weighs 66 trillion tons. A unit followed by 21 ciphers. I'm not a slave, I'm an Asiatic black man. God of the universe, cream of the planet Earth. I know it hurt, black sister, but the pressure rise. Baby, don't cry, I can see it in your eyes. I wanna pay them back, the agony is killing me. Kill my enemies, burn them 1,000 degrees. Message to the black man in the wilderness. So many brothers died, so many that I miss. Put down the cigarettes, the weed, and the alcohol. Sacrifice your life for 26 is just a ball. Manifest my words in Tupac vision. Righteous mind without the drugs, dealing, and the killing. I love the messenger, the water, and the Mac D. A million man marching course who made history. Guaranteed they take heed when they mention me. Brother Brandon 3X on that lock and judge me.
The whole world was against us yesterday.
Only Allah can judge me.
And we were silent when we overcame the world. Because greater was the power that was in us than the power that was in the world.
Minister, as long as the minister with me, see, you know, I put him on every track with me, because he gonna ride with me, and I'm gonna ride with him. Oh Allah, help me.
Liars and whoremongers, all of this. After the child.
Oh Allah, help me, reaching with this poetry. Mama, don't cry, Allah gon' set us free. I had a dream of a prophecy that was fulfilled. Still fantasize about seeing the will. It revealed itself to me, now do you believe? Submit to God first, and you can achieve. I know that God's with me, surely I can see the sign. Every number in my life, it equals a 9. Need completion, mission is to reach the masses of the trouble you, confused by the truth. I know welcome to the end, ain't no killing me, unless it's God's will, who holds the key of eternal life. Father, why they envy me? They only judge me from my tattoos and gold teeth. Clever the sky, they know I'm one of their own. Black brother, Africa's calling us home. The devil sent drones to cowardly act. Black people, can you see we under attack? Muammar Gaddafi, to my brother, rest in peace. Free from the evil of the world, only Allah can judge me.
And just as the Quran said, and we will bite our fingers in intense regret, saying, would that I had taken away with the messenger, and would that this one that deceived me, the distance between him and me was the distance between the east and the west.
All praise to Allah.
I say
that's one of my tracks from my album Completion.
Fly to your God alone.
Appreciate y'all listening. This next track I'm gonna jump into is Mosque 48 theme song. This for my mosque, you know they do them songs, you know, for they city, for they hometown, where, you know, this my home right here, so, you know, I definitely had to, you know, represent. Pray to God. Allah forgive me for my life of sin. I once was a boy, but Muhammad made a man. Sneaking to the plan, wanna see my bright future. Come and hear the teachings and let Allah use you. crack with the brothers on the block. Catch me at Mosque 48 getting out. Brother Minister Jeffrey teaching us the way. Salute to all the brothers in there for our soldiers. Mama pray for me. This uncle became a man trying to maintain in this wicked land. Miss Louis Farrakhan got no love for you. Just know you got a soldier that'll ride for you, a guy for you. Cause you done so much for me. Sacrifice your life just to see your people free. Oh Allah bless me with the wisdom and the way. The righteous way to walk and the righteous way to pray. Eyes to the stars, steady looking for the wheel. I don't pray to spooks, my God's real. And I'ma make sure I represent him to the fullest. Spitting up a truth, every rhyme is a bullet. To my black sister, you know I couldn't forget you. Protectors of a woman, wish a sucker would hit you. First teacher of the child producer of our nation. Close your eyes and go into a deep meditation. Preparation, dedication leads to elevation. Birth Control Act, trying to stop our population. Never you a lie, cause Allah's amazing. Feel the flame blazing, burning for Caucasians. Praying for the destruction of America. Too slow, devil, I'm 10 steps ahead. Staring at the world through my rear view. Just pray to Allah, He can heal you, and show you how to eat to live. No more pork and pig, look at what we did. Raised up a generation alcohol drinkers, marijuana smokers, but not wise thinkers, dreamers. Oh, Allah, don't let them go astray. Let them hear the teaching, what the minister has to say. Million Man March, of course we make history. Peace among each other, without the devil's hissing and tempting me. I'm gonna let my minister, y'all check the minister out, cause I'm gonna let him go and finish that out. But As-Salaam Alaikum, I love you, his brothers too.
All praises to Allah.
Selling drugs and pimping and robbing. But when he got a message that touched deep inside of him, Malcolm the pimp became Malcolm the professor, the teacher, the leader. And that's what's sitting up in these rappers. Now, if you look at 50 Cent, who is hot today, Kanye West, these young men have millions of people in the palm of their hand. I don't want to see us condemn them. I want to see us teach them, encourage them, enlighten them, and encourage them to do better, because the whole world is listening. You go to Africa, it's rap. You go into the Islamic world where they hate Western culture. The young may be hiding it under the bed or somewhere, but they're listening to rap artists. So to me, that says to the young rapper, look man, you didn't want to be no leader, but you got millions that are hanging on every word you say. Why don't you become a teacher of them? I can give you wisdom, put it in rap language. Jesse could give you knowledge, you put it in rap language, and start instructing your people. But then the record executives would say, we don't want that. So, let's set up our own distribution company. We have to distribute something better to our people, because as a man thinks, Jesus said, so is he. You are what you eat. So if you're eating filth, you can't have a clean system. And if you're eating filth in your head day in and day out, you can't come out with clean language and clean actions if that's what you're feeding on. So Mao Zedong, to me, one of the greatest revolutionaries of our time, he had 1 billion people to convert to his ideas. What did he do? He saw the value of the cultural community. So he took his ideas, or they took his ideas, put it in song, put it in dance, put it in plays, put it in books, and before you know it, China became a great, great nation. We'll never become a great nation without our artists. Our artists are the key, not only to the liberation of black people, but the liberation of humanity itself.
As-Salaam. And give Brother Brandon Creation, Alaikum to Farrakhan. Round of applause. All praise to God. You having a good time? All praise to Allah. We're going to continue with our program. and bring up a student in the ministry of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, his Dallas representative, Mosque number 48. Please welcome Brother Student Minister Jeffrey Muhammad.
As-Salaam. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness there is no God but Allah. We thank Him for His intervention in our affairs in the person of Master Farrakhan Muhammad. We thank Him for raising the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, and we're forever grateful and thankful to Him for blessing us with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. I greet you again in our nation's greeting words of peace of As-Salaam. And how's everyone feeling today? I'm feeling fine as well. Let's give Brother Brandon 3X another round of applause. We thank him for that wonderful and positive, uplifting rap. You know, at the end of his song, you know, you see how long he spliced the minister in there? When he finished, he said, I'm going to let my minister teach. Brother Tyrone thought he was talking about me. No, he's talking about the minister. We have the minister. Let's make a distinction. So all praise is due to Allah. We thank Allah for the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Are you keeping up with the time and what must be done lecture series? For those of you who don't know, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has a 52-week lecture series. And he just delivered part 32 on yesterday, which was a part of the Savior's Day lecture. But it was just like he did it yesterday. His messages are so timely. And so the Time and What Must Be Done lecture series, all of our people need to tune in every Saturday to hear the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan at 6 o'clock. And if you don't have internet, you can join us right here at Muhammad Mosque number 48 at 6 o'clock to hear from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He is a time clock. Yes, sir. He is the watchman. Right. He is that man who is delivering the message that keeps us on time. You said on time with what? We have to be in step, in tune, and on time as it relates to what the will of God is. Right. See, we can read the scriptures of what God told Moses 4,000 years ago. It has a relevance on today. We can read what he said to Abraham. That's relevant to today. We can read what he said to Isaiah, to Ezekiel. All of that have relevance today. We can read what he said to Jesus. We can read what he taught Muhammad in the Holy Quran. All of that has a bearing on the man that we have in our midst today and the message that he's delivering us, because all of the conditions that God cured in the past by raising up prophets and messengers exist today in our community. Black people here in America, and in fact America. I heard a great preacher, and I know, don't look at me funny because I'm calling him a great preacher. He was a great preacher. They said he was the preacher of the presidents, Billy Graham. He said if God does not destroy America, he owes ancient Egypt, ancient Babylon, ancient Sodom and Gomorrah, ancient Nineveh. He owes all of those nations an apology if he does not destroy America. Because America is worse than all of those nations, all wrapped up into one. So we thank Almighty God Allah for raising the most honorable Elijah Muhammad and for blessing us with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And you know we have a work to do here in Dallas, Fort Worth, here in the city of Dallas. You know, I was looking at one of our imams here in the city, delivering a khutbah, at the Eid feast, one of the Muslims from prior to 75. I'm going to say this real quick and then we're going to get to our keynote speaker today. But we have been tricked. Yes, sir. And he is one of our brothers, we say from prior to 75, and we make that distinction because that's when the most honorable Elijah Muhammad was physically among us. He's still with us. He was physically present. Come on, man. Yes, sir. And if you don't believe that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is still with us, he is with us. Yes, sir. But all you have to do is look at the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Right. Every time we see him, we see the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Every time we see Minister Farrakhan, we are seeing Master Farrakhan Muhammad coming through him, the power of God in a man. But the brother said to me, he said, yeah, I was with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad prior to 75 when we had real devils in Dallas in, city government and, in this city. We had a real enemy. See, and part of the problem with us is we don't understand that we have a real enemy today. Matter of fact, he's more clever today. This is why we've been lulled into thinking that everything is all right, because we don't recognize the treachery and the skill of the enemy that we're dealing with today. He's on a whole nother level with his devilishment today, to the point where he makes evil fair seem. And so he plays tricks on our community. He divides us up. And one of the tricks that he plays on us is causing black and Latino or our Hispanic, our Mexican brothers to think that we all are each other's enemies sometimes. When you have a school district that is made up 55% Mexican, 35% black, a few percent Asian and others, less than 1% white. But you have 5 white school board members, 3 black school board members, and 1 Hispanic school board member who usually vote with the white folks. Somebody is tricking us. Then they play tricks with the demographics. And so we can read the demographics, but it's a wonderful thing to have a Latino representative in the Nation of Islam who can interpret that data for you in a very intelligent way so that he can uncover some of the lies and the tricks that the enemy loves to play on us. What is a non-Hispanic white? But we're not going to get into it. I'm going to let my brother teach it today. I'm very happy to have here in the city of Dallas and in the state of Texas for his very first time our Latino representative of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. Please help me receive our brother student minister Abel Muhammad with a warm round of applause.
En el nombre de Allah, el benéfico, el misericordioso. In the name of Allah, the beneficent, the merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, who we believe came to us and appeared to us here in North America in the person of Master Farad Muhammad, the great Mahdi of the Muslim world, Messiah that the Christians and Jews have been looking for. But we thank him for intervening and raising for us, because I wasn't alive in the 30s and most of us in this room weren't alive in the 30s. So we most have never seen him, never heard him in person, but he left a witness of who he is, what he was doing, and he raised one from us, and for us, for all of humanity. The one that the scriptures prophesied, and when I say scriptures, I mean these books, Bible and Quran, and the ones we have on the shelf, and the scriptures that our ancient ancestors passed from generation to generation, from father to son, that we never wrote in a book. But we all knew in all of our backgrounds, different tribes, different nations, different backgrounds of people, we were waiting for one to come that would free us. We called him in some traditions Buddha, the enlightened one. In other traditions, Christ, the anointed one. In other traditions, Messiah. In other traditions, we called him Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, depending on the background. And there's every nation, every tongue, every culture has this one figure that they've all been pointing to.
Yes, sir.
We thank him for being born from amongst us and being raised for us. And I'm speaking of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Yes,
that great human being born of the black and indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. But I never heard him. I was born in December of '74, as he was preparing to depart from us, and I never got to hear him for myself. And when I was a young boy growing up, I never heard the words Elijah Muhammad said anywhere. I grew up in Chicago, was born and raised there where he lived. Never saw a picture of him growing up till I got into high school. And there I was introduced to a student of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And so because I met Farrakhan, I met Elijah Muhammad, I met Master Farad Muhammad, so it's in their names that I greet you this morning in the greeting words of peace. We say it in the language of the righteous, which may be new to most of us, because Spanish is not our native language, English is not our native language, and even the tribal languages that we speak are not our natural languages. Those are the languages we've adapted to in the last 6,000 years, 16,000 years, 50,000 years. That's recent history. We've been on the planet for trillions of years. So we want to speak the language that was whispered in the cosmos of the universe when God said, let us make man. So we want to greet each other in those greeting words. We say it in the Arabic language, As-Salaam Alaikum. And in Spanish it means paz sea con usted. In English it would be peace be unto you. But the significance of it is peace. I want to thank first, before I go any further, Brother Student Minister Jeffrey Muhammad, all of the believers and laboring staff here at Mosque number 48, of course as well our parents and our graduates who may already be gone to school that aren't here this morning, but I want to just give them a thank you from the bottom of my heart for inviting me here to Mexico for my first time. And you know, I was telling Brother Rafael as we were driving around for a little while yesterday, just to get a feel for the city. It doesn't feel like any of the other cities I've been to. It has a unique landscape, even just geographically. It feels like you're going up and down when it's a plane. You know, it's very interesting. Even when we flew in, there's not mountains necessarily around or valleys, or I didn't see a lot of that, but it's beautiful. You can feel there's a certain natural beauty in this climate. And it's not by accident, of course, that this, one of the most beautiful parts of what was Mexico, was taken with its rich resources, natural resources that existed. And it's interesting because as I was thinking last night after visiting here to speak with the graduates, and I went home, or back to the hotel, which was my home for the last day, to put together what I thought I was going to say to you, I got a different spirit from what I originally was going to say. It's not bad, hopefully, but I want you to understand something about who you are specifically as people here in Dallas. Those who are black, which you would call, or is called in this world in the sense is African Americans. If you're born and raised here, you're really Mexican. So don't look so ill at the Mexican brother when you see him say, oh, they're coming to take our jobs. No, they're coming to take back what is rightfully ours, as was promised. And the beauty to our Mexican brothers and sisters and indigenous brothers and sisters is we lost this state of Texas because of the black man.
Come on.
This was the place where free slaves came to. The Lone Star State. Before it was that, it was Mexico. It was northern Mexico. And the slaves that were fleeing, they couldn't all go north on the Underground Railroad. There was much easier to come south, just a few miles into Mexico, where black people had been freed by an indigenous and black president, Benito Juarez. Before him even, you have the great president, the second president of Mexico, who's a black man. They'd already freed black people because they were black people. They'd already made it right for indigenous people to be able to live hand in hand with black people because we've been living hand in hand with black people. So the northern tribes of Mexico were what you would call maroon tribes or Seminole type tribes, where they were mixed black and so-called Indian people. Why were we able to mix with one another? Because we knew that there were big black heads in Mexico that we call the Olmecs today. We weren't introduced to those in the 1930s. That's when white people dug them up. Well, who buried them for them to undig them? We knew that they were there. So when we saw one another's faces, we didn't say, oh, who are these odd people, we knew who we were looking at. And we saw how you were being treated by the slave master, because it's the same thing that Europeans tried to do to the indigenous people when they arrived to these shores. The reason they went to get the black man and woman from Africa is because the indigenous people ran and escaped from being put under slavery. We knew the whole hemisphere, every inch of it. We traveled it, not 16,000 years ago, but hundreds of thousands of years ago. We've studied the planet. We weren't on the planet for trillions of years in one little area called the Middle East or Africa. We've been on the planet since there was a planet. We're made of the planet. We look. How do we know where the best part is unless we'd examine the whole of it to determine what is superior to this or that part? We've been deceived about all of our history, and that's what I really want to talk to you about today. Because if we're going to have real unity, because this is the time for unity. What we've been hearing every Saturday from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, God's servant, the representative of the Christ, the servant of the Messiah and God's people. Black, brown, red, yellow, and even the white ones. All of them that want to obey God. This is the man that they've been looking for. You may say, even the white ones? Even the white ones. And if they have hope for salvation, what about me and you who have caught hell and suffered? As Brother Student Minister Jeffrey just said to you, if America can be saved and is not yet destroyed while Egypt and Babylon have fallen, and they're not as wicked as this government is. And if God intervened on behalf of the people of Babylon, of the people of Egypt, by raising amongst them servants, raising amongst them prophets and messengers, and they weren't 40 and 50 and 100 million of them like there is us suffering for 4 and 5 centuries under a wicked oppressor. But if a few thousand people in Palestine deserve the visit of Jesus, if a few million maybe Jews there in the middle of Egypt deserve the intervention of God in the form of Moses and Aaron, if a few scattered tribes of ignorant Arab Muslims in the middle of a desert deserve the intervention and revelation of God, what about black and indigenous people, over 100 million of us in America alone, not to mention Central America, South America, who are suffering for over 5 centuries now at the hand of a wicked oppressor? Doesn't our suffering merit the intervention of God? If we will not be helped by God like he helped those people back then, and there was less of them and they suffered less terribly than we did, then what kind of God is that? That's not a God you and I need to concern ourselves with, because apparently we aren't as important to him as those people were. But we're here to tell you today that we're not just as important, we're the most important people, because they were just a sign of us today. All praises be to Allah. I want to say to you that what we need today, and what we've been hearing from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, is, yes, an economic blueprint over the last 3 weeks. Yes, sir. Yes, that we need to save our young people over the last few weeks. But all of that needs to be done, we have to change the political system. We have to change the educational system. We have to change the way that we have a slave and slave master relationship, even to today. No matter if we're athletes and professionals and millionaires and billionaires, ask Oprah how much her money was respected when they shut the doors in her face. Ask her when she asked how much is that purse, oh that's too expensive for you. Ask her if her $1 million and billions in the bank account, did it stop the mistreatment of her based off what she looked like? No. You know why? Because it's not money that gets us respect. It's not a degree that the enemy gives us that gets us respect. It's not even the religion that we call ourselves, because we've been calling ourselves all of the religions and even making up some new ones hoping to get some respect. And we still don't have respect. The only thing that will gain us the respect we deserve is the unity of our people, which will force us to be respected. But we cannot have unity in disobedience to the will of God. And that's where we've been faltering. We've been uniting our resources and establishing MALDEF. We've been establishing the NAACP. We've been establishing all these organizations that help workers' rights, civil rights, immigrant rights, Mexican rights, black and African rights. All of these things that we've been building, but we've done it independent of one another. So we've gotten some crumbs, and we've been so happy with our crumbs.
Come on, man.
Because for a slave, in the time of slavery, crumbs to a rumbling stomach is pretty good.
Right.
To a starving man, a nickel is pretty good. That he can go buy a nickel's worth of whatever. But to a free man, to a woman and man who knows God, crumbs is not enough for us.
That's right.
Crumbs is demeaning, but how will we get out of that condition so we can get what is owed to us? How are we going to do it? It's only through unity. Well, how are we going to unite? We can't just unite by saying, hey, we're going to go hug one another. No, that's not unity.
Right.
Unity isn't all of us dressing the same. That's uniformity.
That's right.
It's not unity. And it has its role. Uniformity can help lay a base for unity, but it's not unity in and of itself. How many people work in a place where you're a nurse? You got to wear a uniform, but you're not necessarily united with all the other nurses. If you're an officer or a police officer, especially if you're a black or a Mexican one, you may wear the uniform, but you're not united with all the other officers necessarily. Not if you're really trying to serve and protect our people. So there's something that we have to understand. There's a key missing, and that key is the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. I want you to hold on just a second and say, well, wait a second. How can that man be the key to unity? Well, let's look up the definition. What is a key?
Yes, sir.
According to Webster, it's something that affords a means of access. Something that secures or controls entrance to a place. Something that affords a means of clarifying a problem. That which serves to open or explain that which holds together other parts. Minister Farrakhan is all of that. You and I wouldn't even be thinking of black unity. We wouldn't thinking of black-brown unity if we had not heard the word of that man.
That's right.
We wouldn't even know what it looks like to be a black man. We wouldn't know what it looks like to be an upright human being striving to serve God had not that one man decided about 30 years ago now to get up and do something not just for himself, but do something for us as a people. What was it in him that made him stand up and do that for us?
Yes.
It was his love.
Yes, sir.
His love for God, his love for God's people. And that's exactly what the enemy has worked to remove from us, love from one another.
That's right.
When those Indians saw the runaway slaves coming with shackles on, sometimes fleeing, starving, hungry, it was love that made them take them in and embrace them.
Yes, sir.
And give them land in their territory, make them members of the tribe. Why? Not because of hatred, because love, and we saw the suffering of another human being.
Yes, sir.
It was the same love that the Mexicans saw from the runaway slaves, that once Mexico was independent, it allowed them to free the slaves, and it said no human being can be a slave in Mexico, while right across the border, black people were still being enslaved.
Come on.
Yes, sir.
So they started fleeing from their oppressors to Mexico, and Mexico gave them land across their northern border, which is right here.
Yes, sir.
This has been Mexican land, and you weren't called Africans, you weren't called Negroes, you weren't called slaves or freed slaves, you were called Mexicans.
Right.
That's why the Mexican census don't have a large black population, because you didn't know that you were black to call yourself black. It had a minimal slave population, and once that was abolished, because since blacks arrived in Mexico, they were rebelling and trying to be free, and they found kinship and unity with the indigenous people. So the enemy did two things. He tried to separate you from us and alienate us, and he made us hate being indigenous. So he mixed his blood in us and tried to conquer us by killing the male, keeping the woman. And then the woman, out of fear from having lost her man, just like he did in slavery, he now makes the baby to be more docile. There's another word, but I don't want to use it. You get the idea. Because you can't have a strong indigenous Mexican, not Hispanic, not Latino, because we're not that. I want to clear that all up right away. Hispanic, it just bonds us by the language we speak. From Hispaniola, from Spain, and don't get me wrong, we have that in us. We can't deny it. The Spanish blood is all through us. It was calculated. They mixed amongst us and then try to classify us even and make us classify ourselves as white, yet not Anglo.
Yes, sir.
So that they could not allow us in because we were mixed, light-skinned people, just like the one black drop of blood rule in America. If you had any indigenous ancestry, you could not be nobility in the Spanish government. So then how did we get to be classified as white people? You go into Mexico City, the birth certificates of some of the people darker than me, looking like our brother here in the first row, Mexican men and women. But on the birth certificate it says white. When they came to America and they had children here, they looked at it and said, well, they're not black because black is African in our mind.
Right.
I'm not that. Well, what's the other option? Asian, I'm not that. I guess white. Check. Which one? And you don't even speak the language, so blanco in Spanish and in Mexico and Latin America doesn't mean the same thing as white in English. It's a whole different connotation. To say negro or moreno in Spanish, although it's literally translated black, negro, it does not have the same connotation. And it's definitely not the same connotation as negro in English being translated to negro in Spanish. Totally different. Somebody who looks at like me or lighter could be called negro in Mexico, and it's not uncommon. Or it could be somebody as dark as this microphone. They would all be classified as negro. Somebody who's mixed Spanish blood could be mixed with somebody this color, come up with somebody who looks like Barack, and they'll be called moreno. Or it could be somebody much lighter that looks very Spanish, but because they have in their blood the indigenous someplace in the grandmother or great-grandmother, they're not allowed to be called Anglo. What in English we would say white people. So we come into America with a whole different context and concept of race and class and color and try to fit into a racist system that when they say black people, when they say Negro, they're including all of the indigenous people. They don't see Arabs as white people, but they make black people think that Arabs are other than their own race. They don't see Mexicans as white people, but they don't want black people to see them as part of their kith and kin. So they tell you, oh, they're white, but then let them go to a Klan meeting and you'll see who's white and who's not. You'll see which Mexican, which Arab they allow amongst them. Let's just be very clear. What they've done is exactly what Student Minister Jeffrey said. They've confused the mess out of all of us. To the point now where we've lost faith in everything. I don't want to read no Bible for what? That's from the enemy. No, it's from God, and the enemy tampered with it. Big difference. I don't want to have nothing to do with Mexicans. They're mixed with Spaniards. No, we were raped and pillaged and conquered by invaders. We're not part of them, and they're not part of us. Any more that the white man that raped your grandmother and grandfathers and enslaved all of them, they're not your family any more than our conquerors are ours. But why do we see each other as so different? It's because we've been totally deceived and confused about what this is really all about. This was written of thousands of years ago in the scripture. You've read the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, haven't you? Son of man, being laid down in a valley of dry bones. Didn't say the bones were black. Didn't say they were brown. Didn't say they were red. It didn't say they were yellow. It didn't even say they were white, although bones tend to be whitish once you get all the way down to under the skin. But as you get to the bone, what do you encounter? Different shades of brown skin. Yellow flesh underneath. Red blood underneath. All of it's already inside of us. What's all the confusion about? It's because somebody wanted to manipulate us into thinking that one of the colors or shades of it is better than some other aspect of all the colors come from the original Asiatic black man. And notice I said Asiatic, not African. Bigger than Africa. Nothing wrong with that. That's the cradle of civilization. But was it called Africa when it was the cradle of civilization? I hear a scholar saying Olmecs are African culture. Prove it. It's black culture. It predates Africa. How can it be African culture? So we then get into a debate one another. The indigenous thinking they're being robbed of their heritage. The black thinking they're being deceived about their heritage, when all of us have been deceived because we don't know the truth. Because we don't have the key, and we've been given that by the man who knows the time and is setting the time, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. All praises to Allah. I want to read you this from the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, starting in the 15th verse. You know the first part about the dry bones in the valley?
Yes, sir.
But then it says this, after that whole story, and they become an exceedingly great army. We've heard it, right?
Right.
Some of us lived through it and experienced it in October of 1995. When a great call was made.
Yes, sir.
But it says, the word of the Lord came again unto me. This is after he was put down in the valley. The Son of Man is still talking to God someplace now. And a second thing happens, and I want to read this to you, talk about it for a little bit, and then we can go home. The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, there's God talking, moreover, and that's saying, plus, more.
Yes, sir.
Besides that, besides you getting the army together, there's something else for you. Thou, son of man, take thee one stick, and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions. Then take another stick, so you got two sticks, okay?
Yes, sir.
And write upon it for Joseph the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. Now these are two members of the original people, one called Joseph. What's the story of Joseph about? It's about a brother being enslaved by his brothers, right? Keep that in mind. One is Joseph. Well, who's Judah? That's the oldest tribe. That's the one that represents the rest of the brothers that are part of and disconnected from Joseph. And join them, the two sticks. This is what the Son of Man is being told to do. Take two sticks and join them into one stick. And they will become one in your hand. And when the children of your people shall speak unto you, saying, will thou now show us what thou meanest by this meaning? When the people see you do this, they're not going to know what you're doing. They don't know what it means. They're going to ask you. And when they ask you, say unto them, thus says the Lord God, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and tribes of Israel, his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in thy hand. And the sticks whereon thou writest shall be in thy hand before their eyes. And say unto them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whether they be gone, and will gather them on every side, and bring them into their own land, and I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. And one king shall be king of them all, and they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all. Neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions, but I will save them out of all their dwelling places wherein they have sinned, and will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their God. Now there is a lot of those and thous, and Ephraim, and Joseph, and Judah, and sticks, and we don't, what is this talking about? Stick represents authority.
Yes, sir.
It's called a rod to Moses. It's just a stick, though. A stick that represents authority and power. Here, this Son of Man, who is a sign to the people, so that you'll know who you're looking at. It's told not only to take the slaves of the tribe from Joseph, not just the youngest brother that was enslaved and put under bondage to Egypt. Yes, take him first. You notice he's told to take the stick of Joseph first. Where was the work of Master Farad Muhammad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad done first? It was done amongst the so-called Negroes of America. The brother that had been sold into bondage by his own people.
Yes, sir.
But it was for a purpose.
Yes, sir.
Because Joseph would be the master and would be king and ruler in the land where he was once a slave. But in order to get to that, something has to happen. There's a divine unity that takes place. In the land where the people had been enslaved, there are also members of the people, of the original people, of the indigenous people, of Joseph's brothers from all over the planet are now here in the land of modern Egypt.
Yes, sir.
In the land of Mystery Babylon. We're all here suffering. And if you notice, when Joseph's brothers first saw Joseph, they didn't recognize him.
Right.
Even though it was their own flesh and blood, they looked at him and he talked to them and he sent them home, and they never knew this was their brother.
That's right.
How do we act when we see one another? We look at one another, we kind of feel, you know, you look at somebody, did we go to school together? We know each other from our father. But we've been manipulated and deceived and just confused. So now we think that the only black is the black that looks like the children of slaves in America.
Right.
And the same thing happens when we go back across the ocean to our African brothers and sisters. They look at you and say, "You're an odd-looking black person. I think you're black. But you look so different." Same thing happens to us who have been mixed when we go amongst the indigenous who kept purity amongst them and never mixed and don't even speak Spanish. They still speak their indigenous language. There's a rejection of us, not because we hate each other, but because we don't know one another. So if we're going to have unity, we have to have love. If we're going to have love, we have to have knowledge, because you can't love what you don't know. And God is giving us a clear sign of who that unity and who that man is that will represent his unity, because we can't forge the unity on our own. We can't go in a room and decide we're going to have a strategic alliance, political unity between blacks and Mexicans, because politics is their game.
Right.
We can't go in a room and decide we're going to have economic unity, blacks and Mexicans, because economics is their game.
Right.
We can't even in religion say we're going to have unity between black pastors and Mexican pastors. Go and see how hard they try to do that.
Come on.
Who do you see stretching out, trying to embrace and bring us all together? Which pastor does that?
Yes.
There is one doing it. Because I'm here representing him now, the Honorable Minister of Farrakhan. He's the key. The key is that which opens up the way. We couldn't even be talking unity except that that man is showing us what unity looks like. I didn't know anything about Mexican history, Latin American history, and my Spanish was terrible until I became a follower of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. The first time I met him, he said to me, "Where are your people from?" I said, "Mexico." He goes, "How often do you go back?" And he started telling me parts of Mexican history and where he lives and where the Honorable Elijah Muhammad lived in Mexico. Why? I've seen him do it with Italians that he's met on the street in Chicago. When we were out soldiering, he ran up on a brother who was Mexican and Italian. Young man, he was I think 20 years old, and the young man said, "I watched your lecture on TV before. You were talking about the deception of preachers." And he'd never thought that that day on the streets in Chicago, in Southeast Chicago on the hood, he'd be shaking the minister's hand later that day. And you know what the minister talked to him about? Not his Mexican side, not that he was black. He started asking him about his Italian heritage. And you know what he did? He started teaching him about the history of Italy. About Columbus, about how they had to fight to establish Italy. I'm talking about ancient history. And you could tell the young man was like, I don't even know. He said, "Go back." Who said, "Which one of your parents?" He goes, "My mother's Italian." He said, "Go back, ask her to take you back." Strange, isn't it? He didn't say, "Go read about Marcus Garvey." He said, "Go read about how they got their knowledge from the African and Asiatic civilizations of the Middle East." Because you know what? If he puts him on a quest, he'll eventually get there. But he's showing the highest level of civilization. What is civilization? You can't be civilized unless you know something about the knowledge and wisdom and history of the human family of the planet Earth. Why? Not to show off, but when you know something about the other people on the planet, their ethnicities, which are recent history and are all originated from you and I, then it gives you a softer heart of mercy when you know something about their suffering.
That's right.
Do you know that's why it's calculated to take slavery out of the textbooks in America?
Yes, sir.
That's why they don't talk about the taking of Mexico from the Mexican people, because it opens wounds.
Yes,
and it shows the hurt of other people, and young people are not as stupid as adults are. They just see and feel suffering because they're in pain constantly in a world like this.
That's right.
And if they can be endeared and manipulated positively or negatively, then that pain, that suffering, that warmth, that mercy, that tenderness that they feel can be used to serve either a good purpose or a bad purpose.
Yes, sir.
We want to teach our people the truth so that we know what has happened, but it's not just good enough for black people to know. Mexicans have to know what happened to black people. White people have to know what happened to black people. Jews have to know what happened to black people. Why? Because if I don't see your suffering, then you're not like a real human being to me. You don't care. They care more about the suffering of the dogs on the highway than they do about us. That's why they don't want you to know about the Mexicans who lose their life crossing the Rio Grande, crossing the desert. Why? Because then it becomes not a person or a thing, a robot coming to take my job. It becomes a mother who died. It becomes a baby who died crossing the border. For what? To get jobs that were stolen from them on land that was stolen from them, deprived from their black brothers. All this suffering that we're under. All this weight that we're under that has us separated from one another. We're swallowed down and drowning in pain, and all we're trying to do is stay afloat. I don't have time to look at suffering. I just got to breathe. But there's a man with an oxygen tank and a boat and a life preserver throwing it to you, telling you, here, take this, it's the time and what must be done. All we have to do is listen, but the enemy has created an atmosphere where just to listen to Minister Farrakhan, there's an obstacle when you hear his name. He's made Mexicans think that he's some pro-black nationalist, gun-toting, wants to kill everybody who's lighter than black, and since we don't see ourselves as black and no, we're not white, we're in no man's land. We're suffering and scared. You don't see Mexicans running to the church. We stay in Catholicism because at least that's a beast that we're used to. We know what we're getting out of that system. That's a heck of a thing, isn't it? To know that this isn't right, but hell, I've been doing it for hundreds of years now. This is what my grandma did, this is what my granddad did. It's never done anything for me. So let me prop up and make my own God, my own idol. I'll put up a statue now, Saint so-and-so. God is so-and-so, this one, that one, thinking that it's going back to our indigenous roots. Our indigenous people were not polytheists. They became that when we fell from what we originally were. But even in the history of the indigenous people, when we have many gods, because we're all gods, there's something to it.
Yes, sir.
But even in that, there's always a supreme creator God. Ask the indigenous people. There's one, whether it's in Africa or amongst the native tribes of the Americas, there's always a supreme being. Come on. And as long as we can recognize that, we have a base for unity.
Yes, sir.
Well, here's Mexicans all claiming one God. Black people, whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jew, or whatnot, spiritual, whatever you want to call that, light candles and incense thinking you're deep, whatever that is to you. Go ahead. Because you notice, Mexicans light candles too. In Chicago, you can buy them in the major grocery stores, Dominic's and Target. You can go in and get a little saint and pick it up one day. There's one that's the five powers of the African is one of the candles that the Mexican likes. You don't know because you don't go look at it. What's the 5 powers of the African? It's the 5 pillars of Islam. It's our faith has always been connected to you. The Indians that ran and escaped because they didn't want to be enslaved and tortured anymore, they ran under the orders of the chiefs. They took the drums, they took the music, they took the history, they ran into the swamps, they ran up into the mountains because they said, keep the ritual. Because in the ritual is something of significance, not for now, but the time is coming.
Right, right.
And we'll need you to come out of the mountains, come down with the story, with the ritual, which you don't even understand right now. But in 1,000 years, in a few hundred years, this ritual is going to be what the people need to bring them back to the way of God. This scripture, where to put it? Oh, here it is. This didn't mean as much to the people of Palestine as it does to us today. What was given to Moses in the Old Testament didn't mean as much to those people as it does to us today. What was given to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Arabs did not mean as much to those people, and they adored the book as much as it means for us today. Prophet Muhammad himself said, and I'm paraphrasing it or depending on the translation, it said that he told the people that he wanted us to keep the word of the Quran pure. And his hope and prayer was that those in the last days would understand the word better than those who are with me hearing it now. What does that tell you and I? That this is not for the context in which it was necessarily revealed only, but it's pointing us to an end time. What do you think the Mayans were keeping 25,000 year cycle of history calendars for? They didn't have nothing else to do. Which one of them sat for 25,000 years to calculate? Next time we see that star. 50,000 years, next time we see that comet. Who sat around long enough to do that? There has to be another purpose for it. But we would not know the purpose of the ritual. Why did they hide their rituals in the Catholic religion? Why did they hide their ceremonies in the religion of the oppressors? Because they knew there was a time coming where it would make more sense. Why did God allow their tampering with the book? Because even in their tampering was his plan. Because it's not written of here of a Trinity. Nowhere in here. Yet there is a Trinity present. And about 1 billion people on the planet believe in the Trinity. But they don't know what the real Trinity is. We look and we've been praying to statues that look like men. And looking to it, that's right, and women, looking to it for help. We pray to a woman named Maria every day in Mexican households. That's right. And they'll say from their lips, oh, we're not praying to her, we're asking her to intervene on our behalf. Well, wait a second, what's so special about that woman that she could intervene for you? She's flesh and blood just like you. It's showing us right in the ritual that God is present in human beings and he works in human beings. Yet we pray to the statue of a wooden and stone Maria and slap around the Maria that's living in our house. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan asked the question. He said, what is time? He said that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that time is motion calculated or measured. Time dictates action. Activity must be in accord with the direction of light and in accord with the season of time. What does that all mean? We're still functioning like this is slave time. We're still functioning like an invader is present and like we have to worship his religion. We're still functioning as if this is the time of our enslavement and not the time of the presence of God to free us. That's right. Well, you say, well, I don't see no signs of it. That's what they were studying in the heavens. That's what they were calculating for you and I. They weren't wrong to say December 2012 was the end of this world. That's right. It was the end of a cycle of time, and if you notice, right after that cycle of time ended, a new cycle of time has begun, and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan started a year-long series called The Time and What Must Be Done. Don't measure it. If you're at the end of a cycle, that means it's time for a new cycle. How will you know what to do if you don't know the signs of the time? The seasons are marked by an extension of the presence of light. That's how you know seasons change. Seasons are getting longer, we're approaching summer. Days are getting shorter, we're approaching winter. The presence of light dictates the season that we're in. I want you to really think about this. What season are we in when the servant of God is making sure he comes on every day, every week? never done that before. No one has ever done that before. And spoken on what theme? What is the theme? The time and what must be done. How do you calculate the season? How do you know where we are in God's time? By the presence of God's man. So the Mayans are looking for the history. The indigenous know something has happened and we're waiting for something new to happen. Well, that doesn't fall out of the sky.
That's right.
Somebody has to instruct us. You say, oh, men can't do that. Then why are you praying to a statue that looks like a man? Why are you whispering the names of a man and a woman? Jesus, Maria, this one, saint, that one. What are you saying their names for? Because you and I have never received any help except for and outside of a man and woman coming to help you and I. Quetzalcoatl was a man. Kukulkan was a man. Jesus the Christ, a man. Muhammad, a man. That's right. All of the great ones, men, meaning not just necessarily male, but physical human beings. Right. If a chicken came up here, and I don't care how beautiful its words were. If a boa constrictor was up here wrapped around and started hissing something to you, I don't care if it's the pure word of God, you would not even hear it for what you're looking at. The Quran says it like this: if you were an angel, I'd send you an angel. But you're a man, so he sends us men and women. But you can't say, well, it was a chicken, I got distracted. It was a snake, I don't speak serpentine, and I can't do that. We see the power of God manifest. We bear witness to it in every act of greatness that has ever existed on the planet. Is through the form of some human being.
That's right.
Oh, Jesus paid it all. He died, which is the action, the last action of every human being on the cross for my sins. That means he breathed a breath like you.
That's right.
What did he ask you to do? He didn't say, go to the club now, you're all good, you're absolved. He didn't say, just go and be a good slave now. Just go and wait till you're dead to join me in heaven. You don't find that anywhere in his writings. They misinterpret him talking to some of those that were crucified with him, saying, today you will be with me in my Father's house. They misinterpret that. That's an interpretation. Let's read all of what Jesus said. Because when they said, Master, teach us how to pray. In Spanish, we say the prayer is called Nuestro Padre, or Padre Nuestro. In Spanish or in English, it's called Our Father. He said, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on the moon, in spirit world.
Milky Way?
Yeah, right. Even the Milky Way is a real place. On earth.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
As it is in heaven. That's what Quetzalcoatl represents. The symbol of a feathered serpent which is found on King Tut in Egypt. Look at the crown of King Tut. There's a bird. And then there's a serpent wrapped around his head. That's the man that every human being's been looking for. The history and the traditions of how this place, Mexico, was discovered is that there was a vision given that wherever you see a bird eating a snake on top of a cactus, that will be the new homeland of your people. Well, interesting note, there are no birds in the Western Hemisphere that eat snakes.
Abel.
They're only found in Africa. Where did we get that vision from? Cactus represents wilderness. The eagle represents the birds that fly to the heights of the heaven. It's a sacred bird, as all birds are, but in particular amongst the indigenous, because he represents the heights to which a human being can go, the heights of the heaven. Yet its humility is it goes all the way back down into the dirt to go get what it needs to eat. But it's even higher than that. It means God coming from his exalted place down into the dirt to resurrect those who are buried in a shallow grave. It represents a man, all praises due to Allah. It represents a man who's made of the eagle people, the dark, the brown, the black people of the earth. and who is made also of the serpentine people nature. He's made of both of them, so he's called a feathered serpent because he's mastered both natures. And in his mastering of the serpentine, the lower nature, the devilish nature of the human being, he can show us how to conquer that and erase that part of us forever. He can make us into new creatures. In Arabic, we call him the Mahdi because he comes to set down every tyrant, starting with the tyrannical way that we govern our minds and our houses and our families. In the Christian tradition, he's called Christ Messiah because he's anointed with power to crush the wicked, starting with the wickedness we do to ourselves, our families, our communities. In the other traditions, Quetzalcoatl is called, or Kukulkan, they both mean serpent with feathers or feathered serpent. Well, there's no human being. Just because you get a coat made and think you're pimped out with a coat made of snake skin and some porcupine feathers or some other peacock stuff on you, that don't make you a feathered serpent. I mean, it may make you a feathered serpent for real, but it won't make you that. It means he conquered that which we've been wrestling with and it had to be perfected. He's the answer to all we are looking for. And in the traditions, there's two pictures of Quetzalcoatl. In one, he's black, and in one, he's white. And the scholars don't know why. They say it represents his duality. They're so right, they have no idea. It represents his creator side and his destroyer side. It represents his day side and his night side. It represents the two natures of man and woman that we've been wrestling with until the birth of Christ, Quetzalcoatl Mahdi, and then he gives to us the key so that none of our people have to suffer that again. So we know that Farrakhan is the key because there's no place else on the planet, I guarantee you, where Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, black people, Asian people, even Caucasian people can come to hear that which God has designed and given to make us into himself. There's other places they'll quote scripture. There's other places where they even quote the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But without Farrakhan, the key, you cannot access, you can't get into, you can't approach, and you can't make real what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad envisioned in his mind. I want to wrap it up here. Let me take a quick break. I want you to think about this. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he made you black. Think about that. You were Negroes when they found out. How long did it take you to start like being called black? Some of us still don't like being called black. You know, he taught Mexicans in the 30s and 40s in Detroit. He taught Puerto Ricans. Some of them were darker because the darker we are, the more we suffer. So at first there was many of our darker brothers who finally found relief in somebody not putting up images of a white Jesus. Somebody teaching them that your color doesn't make you less. You're that color. The darker you are, the closer you are to the originator. But we can't be close to him just because physically. That's cheap, man. That's right. Then if I go get a tan, I'm closer to God now? But it is a sign. That's right. Because the longer you're in the light of the sun, the darker your skin gets. I don't care how light you are. It has an effect on how we look. And the more you put yourself in the presence of the wisdom coming from God through the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, you will become closer to the appearance of God himself. The yardstick of measurement of our actions. If our actions are not in accord with the time, then we will suffer loss. That's all we're doing right now. We're losing jobs, we're losing schools, we're losing money, we're losing life even. We're losing our marriages. You name it, we're losing. There's nothing we're gaining in. We gained a president and lost everything that we had gotten. We lost civil rights, we lost voting rights. We're losing even when we supposedly gained. Because we're not on time.
That's right.
Time is the yardstick. That's right. Injustice in the courts.
That's right.
They're showing you and my eye to our faces.
That's right.
I've met with young people and their families in Chicago, Mexican, most of them, some from Central America. When you look at them, you can tell they're not white.
Come on.
You can tell and feel from them, even though they may not speak English well, you can tell this is part of your family.
Come on.
This is part of the people who used to be here in Mexico. And when this was taken, this part, Arizona, Colorado, California, New Mexico, they wouldn't call it New Mexico unless there was an old Mexico.
Right.
How did it become New Mexico? Because they took it and wanted to make it new after themselves. But here, Dallas in Texas, this is the real New Mexico. Because this is where knowledge and wisdom of the original man will begin newly from here. Because this is the place, it's an interesting number you all have here in the 48. It's the foundation for the infinite. It's the beginning of that which has no end. It's the base of that which can never be removed. It's right that from here we should have unity between the real inhabitants, the real Mexicans, and the new Mexicans that came here in the form of the black man and woman of America. The slaves that were freed here were given this land along the border, and you were the border patrol for Mexico. You didn't know that, did you? How do you think the white people over there in Alabama and in Louisiana that owned you felt that you were now a landowner with guns, protecting the border? Why were you protecting the border? What do you mean? Were there people illegally crossing Mexican borders into and from the new colonies into Mexico? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You know what they were doing? Trying to enslave black people along the border.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Trying to enslave indigenous people. Trying to slowly make an infringement in, set up a trading post.
Right.
And then call on their government, oh, they're taking my land.
Yes, sir.
What, you mean the land that you came and squatted on? That somebody else owns, and then to add insult to the injury, they're looking at their property.
Right.
Chasing them out of land that they're trying to claim as their own. That's what infuriated them. That's what made them want to take this from Mexico. They wanted this for themselves, and in particular, they knew the land was rich, but you were the richness that they wanted.
Yes, sir.
They wanted the black slave back. So they went and fought, and there was war fought over the black man of America. And Mexico lost, unfortunately. And we go down the annals of history now. And black people disappear from the history of Mexico.
Yes, sir.
Even from the Mexicans' memory. They're not taught how they lost Texas. They're not taught how they were conquered and enslaved. They make us think it was Pocahontas' story, where it was some benevolent white man came and they saw each other across a bloody field of war that they started. And then they fell in love, and look, love conquers everything, even the hatred between two warring people. No. Lies can only for so long hide the truth.
That's right.
They hated what Mexico did by giving you land so much that when they took Texas, when after the Alamo, after all of that stuff, they marched the American army all the way down into Mexico City.
Yes, sir, they did.
And they were going to take Mexico City. But they decided, we'll just take Texas, we'll take all of that because it's minerally rich. But just as a show, they marched into Mexico City and allowed them to keep it. And what we've been dealing with ever since is a docile government in Mexico that serves the needs of the rich and wealthy and the white. There's a white aristocracy in Mexico that does not serve the masses of dark-skinned people. That's what they're terrified about. That no matter our skin shade because of the mixture, that we would hear this truth and realize I'm not black in the African sense, I'm black in the Asiatic God sense. We're members of the same family. I want to read you this as I close. I tweeted the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan last year a question, and it's taken me a year to really understand parts of it, of his answer. I asked him, I said, Brother Minister, what do you think is the key to the unity of the black, indigenous, Mexican, Latin American, and Aboriginal people. He responded to me while I was in the hospital with my daughter. My 8-month-old daughter had just been born. So as I was in the hospital, I got a chance to read the answer from the minister. But because of all of that, I hadn't really studied the answer till I was coming here. He said, to the degree that we are successful in unity is to the degree that we show the common root of our humanity. We are branches of a tree that has a singular root. And once that root is known, that we are all from the same great source, then it is easy to see how we can relate to each other past our tribes, nations, ethnicities, and races.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Period.
Yes, it is.
Beautiful.
I thought it was some complicated scheme or... You know why the Son of Man is told in Ezekiel to take both sticks and make them one in his hand?
Come on.
It becomes a rod in his hand, which is a sign of his authority and his anointing from God. The two people, the black, the brown, the red, the yellow masses are two branches of the same tree. That's why there's so much commonality. We have a feathered serpent here, you have one in Africa. We have pyramids here, you have them in Africa. You find them in the coast of Japan. You find these motifs everywhere. We painted ourselves, we covered ourselves in the fur and skins of animals. You did it in Africa. Now we can argue about, well, it started here or it came from there. At some point, both of those came from someplace else. The tribe is recent. The nation is recent. Our ethnicity is recent. Our race is recent. At one time, there was nothing but black people on the planet. Not black skin, black people ethnically, nationally, tribally, racially. There's always been tribes on the planet. But we were only one black nation. We had yellow, brown, red hues to our skin, even white colored skin, but we did not mistreat one another based on that because we recognized it came from the same root. We knew that it was a common origin. What has happened with all the God we know now? It's that we've been taught to hate ourselves.
That's right.
And what we are getting from the man who is the key is how to reconnect to one another. In this dispensation, I'm quoting the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in closing here, from Closing the Gap. In this dispensation of time, it is love that makes you something in the eyes of Allah God. Because it is only love of Allah God and love of the truth and love of the purpose for His coming and love of the people for whom He came that would cause you to have value in His sight. Love is not proud, love is long-suffering. Love endures all, it hopeth all. This has to be the spirit, the attitude of a person that has been called by God to act as a redeemer. The price he must pay is to be all but completely selfless, because the nature of vindictiveness is and the nature of vindictiveness is and the unwillingness to suffer is. Meaning you won't be willing to suffer when you have a spiteful, vindictive spirit. Only love makes you long-suffering. Only love will make whatever the ego is suffering from, it removes the desire to retaliate. Don't we love ourselves right now? We're beginning to fall in love with ourselves because we're beginning to know ourselves. But we know that we've crossed from death into life, not when you begin to love yourself, but when you begin to love the brotherhood. Because you're not really a Muslim until you want for your brother or sister what you want for yourself. The question is today, who is your brother? Who is your sister? Who is your neighbor? You and I have been given the parameters of our nation. What is the population of the original nation in the wilderness of North America and all over the planet Earth? The population of the original nation is 17 million. That was back in 1930s. Right. Today, the original nation numbers somewhere around 40, 50 plus million. With the 2 million Indians, plus the descendants of the indigenous, which number around 60 to 70 million in North America, and in the hundreds of millions going into Central America, the Caribbean, and all over the planet Earth. At that time, it was 4,400,000,000. Today, we're about 6 billion on the planet Earth, but because there's not any more white people than there were hardly back then. But they're trying to manipulate the senses and make us classify ourselves as white people to keep us divided from you. So they're saying in 50 years, there's not going to even say Hispanic on there anymore.
Wow.
They're trying to make us black and white, but they don't want us to, and they'll never accept us as white because they know we're not white. Right. What they want is a new slave class of people that they can keep under their control and use for a tool and a slave.
Yes, sir.
But with love, it'll make us selfless, and only when you are selfless are you not offended by the wickedness of those who you have come to save. I do not say to you I do not say you are unaffected and that it does not hurt you, but you cannot respond as a natural man or woman. You must respond according to the nature of love and the nature of yourself as a redeemer. You see Mexicans suffering, what's your posture towards them? You see black people suffering, what's our posture towards them? See, if you love yourself, you know that we come from the same root. We come from the same branch. And there's a man setting the tone, setting the example of the time. He's sending the vibrational key for us to tune up on. That's right. You ever seen on some of those old cartoons, a guy would come out with a little flute and he'd go, and then the singer would tune up on that. He was hitting a certain key. That's right. Farrakhan is the key that we have to get in tune with for the time and what must be done. The economic blueprint is not just for black people today. In the narrow sense, it's for the black nation. It's for to end the want and suffering and poverty amongst the black nation. Black people are suffering in Mexico, in northern part and southern part. Black people are suffering in Canada. They're suffering in the Caribbean. Of course, you see them suffering in Dallas, in Chicago, in LA, in Alabama, in Mississippi. What are we going to do?
Good question.
Let's unite.
Yes, sir.
Well, how do we unite? Let's get on the key of the concert master. Minister Farrakhan has asked, to what degree do you feel love motivates and fuels you to do what you do in the way that you do it? He said, that is the answer. Love is the power. Love is the force. Love is the gasoline or the fuel that allows one, such as myself, to do what I do and appear indefatigable, meaning he doesn't get tired.
Right.
Untired. Not worn by what one does, and it is precisely because I love so much of what I am doing.
That's right.
I love to impart knowledge. I love to see the eyes of a human being come open to truths that mean something or can be a motivating factor to make their personal lives more meaningful. This is what gives meaning to my own life.
Beautiful.
As I give, I get. As I feed, I am fed. As I energize others, I too am energized because I believe that is what I am born into this world to do. What about you? What do you love to do? What do you know and are energized when you do? And don't you even feel better, not when you're in your home alone doing it, but even if you like to do something, build cars, model, design clothes, you're not happy when you hang it on the rack in your house. You're happy when somebody else sees it and enjoys it and appreciates it. That's the beauty of unity. That's what we must do. We can't live on our islands anymore. We have to find a way to come together, and the key to that is the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He is the man who started Black Family Day. He told me that he started Black Family Day in New York City.
Right.
When he saw a black and Hispanic brother fighting on the bus one day.
Go ahead. Come on, let's go.
He didn't call it Black and Hispanic Family Day.
No, sir.
He didn't call it Black and Other People Family Day. Black family. In the 60s and 70s, we may not have seen ourselves as black, but why were we classifying ourselves as black on census? Because we knew we weren't white. Now something has happened since the 60s and 70s. We don't have stars in Latin America that look like Celia Cruz anymore. We don't have them looking like Machito anymore. Why? Because they wanted to take us away from bonding with and connecting with you, because that was Pharaoh's fear the whole time. That the one slave would join on with an enemy and come against them. Especially one that would change the language. Well, the language that we're speaking today is not Spanish or English. It has to be the language of love, which comes from obedience to God. And Farrakhan is the only black leader. He was the first one who stood up and said the Mexican people should have rights to amnesty and be allowed to be citizens and work in America without any questions asked. He was the first black leader to do it.
That's right.
Back in before 2000, he did it. When they asked him, he didn't take a poll. He didn't come ask us as believers. He made a statement and we moved forward with it.
Right.
He didn't have a press conference because it was politically a good thing to do or media-wise it was a campaign. No, he made a statement based off consciousness. He says we want to support anything that keeps families united.
Yes.
What's the problem then? Why would that be a threat to black people? Why would that be a threat to America? It's only a threat because what it really represents and what they're really afraid of is a non-white people. There's only two people on the planet, black and white. Tribes, ethnicities, all this other stuff means nothing. They're afraid that in 50 years they knew this was going to become a black-brown country, a black country. And if we already have a black president now, what are we going to have then when we have all the power? So they're trying to make a division between us to keep us separate from one another so that they can say, don't worry, I'll settle this dispute. Trust me, I've done it before. Ask the indigenous people, I settled their tribal conflicts. Look at how well they settled it. That's what they want to do. They want to settle us, squash us. They want us alive only if we're willing to be used. So the only thing that this is for us is a time of survival. And we can only survive in unity. But not only can we survive in unity, we can thrive in unity. And we will make real the words of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said to me. He said that one day this country would be ruled by the black, the Mexican, and the little part left for the whites who would submit. You already have that makeup here.
Right.
Your school system points to that unity.
That's right. That's right.
That's why the enemy, there's 5 of them trying to justify their place.
Right.
At the top of it. But we don't want to necessarily unite up there. We want to unite right here on the street now. And unity doesn't mean we all call each other black, we all call each other Muslim, we all dress. No, that's uniformity. Right. Each of us has our role to play.
That's right. That's right.
The minister said, don't beat the Mexican brothers down with the black talk. He said, don't bog, look up the word, don't bog them down with all the black talk.
Yes, sir. That's right.
I had to go look up the word. I don't know what that meant. Right. It means to put like a weight on something.
Right.
See, we don't know who we are. We've rejected being Indian, brown. We want to be accepted as white, though there's something in us knowing we'll never be accepted as that. They make it painfully clear we can't be that. So there's a part of us looking for identity. We don't look like you, so when you call us black, it feels like we're losing something or we're being misidentified. No, you can't do that to somebody.
Right.
You're dealing with somebody who suffered total amnesia. They know, and we know we have something indigenous in us. Let's connect with our internal self, immediate knowledge first. The minister told me go study Mexican history first. Go study Spanish, not because it's our language, it's the language that connects us to the majority of our people. Although that's changing too, and we'll talk about that some other time. But I want you to understand that what you and I have in unity doesn't mean we have to all use the same language. Respect people for what they are.
Right.
Learn and be a civilized human being. That means you got to know something about their history. And when you know something about that, you can relate it and make it understandable how it relates to something from your history. And now you know what you've done? You've done your duty as a civilized man because you've taught civilization to somebody else.
Yes,
the Mexican doesn't know their own history, much less somebody else. The black brother and sister doesn't know their own history, much less somebody else. So we who are civilized must take on all of that responsibility. But guess what? We have the perfect example. He told us about Spanish American history. He told us about the Puerto Rican the taking of Cuba by the Americans and the Europeans. He's already given us that. What a beautiful mercy and key that God has given us in the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So I want to leave you just with these words. Be united in spirit and with the spirit of love. Overcome whatever division out of ignorance and conditioning our people have. And there's no better example of what this teaching does. You don't have to go run out and take Rosetta Stone and become an excellent Spanish teacher or speaker. You can do that if you'd like. The best example is again in Minister Farrakhan. I've seen him convert people who don't speak a word of English. How does a man, they couldn't read his books, they couldn't hear his lectures, how did he make them Muslims? I asked a Mexican brother who works with him, I said, well, since you can't read his books, what is it why do you want to be a Muslim? He said, because I've never met anyone who treated my family so well. He's been so kind to us. Whatever he is, I want to be. That's what the effect of love does for our people. So love one another, be real brothers and sisters. I thank you as I greet you in peace. As-Salaam. All praise is due to